third way through the chapter. This chapter, even though it's number 26, is actually the beginning of a subsection of the work, and a very important one because it deals with issues that have not changed. The Alter Rebbe in his introduction writes that the Tanya was written to replace people coming to him for counseling, spiritual counseling. So instead of dealing with each individual over and over again, who knows how many people would come to him and deprive him of his ability to answer all of them, he decided to put his answers, his advice, in the Tanya. And the Chassidic tradition is that every problem and every issue that we need mentoring can be found in the Tanya. And if someone can't find it in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe himself addressed that in his introduction. You go to the rabbi, Chassidic teacher of your community, and they will explain things to you, and they're not allowed to act humbly and say that they don't know and they can't. By doing that, they're withholding the knowledge from other people, and that's a very serious matter. So the Alter Rebbe said that if you combine the Tanya together with human mentors who will help apply it, that will give you the answer to all today's ills and problems. What is the issue that the Alter Rebbe begins discussing in chapter 26? The issue is simcha. Simcha, for our purposes, we'll just translate it as joy, even though it's not really translatable because it means so much more than just joy and happiness. Simcha is that emotion that allows us to be open. Actually, simcha is not so much of an emotion, it's the facilitator of all of our emotions. When a person is depressed, what happens is that the person is closed. They can't express their love. They can't express their fear. They can't express any type of positive emotion. I'm not using fear in the negative. On the contrary, it's only that the negatives seem to be able to express themselves. That's why Rabbi Aaron of Karlin, the famous Chassidic master, said, though the Torah does not consider sadness as a sin, it could lead to every sin, because it means that you're essentially closing up all of your defenses that allow you to conquer the negatives and allow you to prevail in your conflicts with the negative. So that is such an important part of our life, to be able to maintain simcha, to maintain joy. But there are a lot of reasons why people will not be happy. And the Alter Rebbe is going to address all of them, the physical and the spiritual. In this chapter, he's going to focus first on the physical. But before we get to that, we're still in the middle of his introduction. Before he gives us the advice, he is setting up the importance of simcha, of joy. And he quoted the words of the Psalms. King David talks about a broken spirit and a broken heart. And the Zohar explains that how do you break the spirit of unholiness through a broken heart, which seems to contradict what we're saying all along, that joy, simcha, is so important. Well, the answer is that there is place for sadness in Judaism. Sadness for one's sins, for one's shortcomings, but only as a prelude to joy. If you want to know whether a feeling of sadness has any merit, person, let's say, did something wrong. They made a mistake. They caused some harm to someone, and you feel guilty. Is guilt a good thing or a bad thing? Well, most people would say that that's a negative. Guilt is a negative, and there's the caricature of Jewish mothers who are always making us feel guilty. And others would say guilt is a positive thing. The Torah tells us that we're supposed to bring a guilt offering. when we say in our prayers, Ashamnu, I am guilty. So we're supposed to express guilt. So what is it? Is guilt good or is guilt bad? And especially within the Chassidic framework, where joy is so important and so emphasized, that how could we justify guilt? So I just want to share with you a little anecdote. A couple came to me a number of years ago, and they had a terrible tragedy happen in their family. They lost a child, and they felt terribly guilty. And everyone they went to, friends, family, therapists, were telling them, don't feel guilty. It's not your fault. You didn't do it. You didn't cause it. And they were not comforted. They still felt terribly guilty. And they felt terrible. And someone, I guess this was their last resort, someone said, why don't you go speak to the rabbi? I mean, they went to therapists, they went to psychologists, they went to friends, they went to everyone they could think of, and everyone told them the same thing. Don't feel guilty. It's not your fault. Now, I'm glad they told me that before I spoke to them, because I probably would have said the same thing to them, which comes natural. I mean, if the person is ridden with guilt and it's destroying them, it's only natural for you to say to them, don't feel guilty. It's not your fault. Get it over with. But since they told me that everyone told them that, and they were not comforted, then I knew that Hashem was guiding me in the right direction to say the right thing to them. I said, who am I, or how can I tell you not to feel guilty? How do I know you're not guilty? So that's not my role to tell you you shouldn't feel guilty, or that anyone could tell you shouldn't feel guilty. The issue here is not whether you should feel guilty or not. The issue is what you do with that guilt. Because guilt is sometimes a positive thing. Because what is guilt in relation to the soul? It's the same thing as pain in relation to the body. If you have a pain in your arm, then what do? You go to the doctor who finds the diagnosis it and treats it. If you just ignore the pain, then what may happen, God forbid, is that it gets worse. And then when you finally try to do something about it, there's no treatment for it anymore. So pain is a positive thing. A person who can't feel pain won't survive very long. Pain is necessary to be able to discover what you need to do to make your body more healthy. And the same thing is true about the soul. The soul feels pain, but the soul doesn't feel pain the way the body feels pain. Its way of feeling pain is a sense of very deep dissatisfaction, and it relays that to the conscious mind in the guise of guilt. So what are you supposed to do when you feel guilty? Not say, no, I shouldn't feel guilty, it's not my fault, but on the contrary, you're supposed to take that guilt and use it as a way of correcting what you did wrong to get rid of the guilt, to get rid of the pain. Not to ignore the pain and deny it, but to get rid of it. When guilt doesn't let you get rid of it, it overwhelms you, that's a destructive thing. Same as pain. If pain just wreaks havoc on you and it doesn't allow you to do anything and it paralyzes you, then you know that pain is a negative. It's not something that you should allow to endure. But when pain motivates you, then that pain was a godsend. It alerted you to the problem that you have, and you're now able to correct it. So in this vein, the Alter Rebbe is saying, you feel sad because you did something wrong, you made a mistake, you sinned. On the contrary, that's not a negative. As he quoted the verse, in all sadness there is profit. Profit means that you're investing something. No one likes to give away something that they own, but everyone is willing to invest. So if the sadness, if the guilt makes you invest in simcha, in joy, because the sadness in the right form, in the right context, as we discussed last week, what is the context for sadness? Number one, you decide when you're going to feel sad. you set aside time at night, once a week, once a month, to reflect on your shortcomings, and not any other time. Don't allow it to enter your mind, because you have to be in control of your pain, of your sadness, and not the sadness in control of you. That's the important criterion. And the second important criterion is that if the sadness doesn't dissipate after you treated it, and it doesn't morph into joy, then that sadness is destructive, and it's not coming from the right side, it's coming from the left side, from the negative part of you. It's a way to demoralize you. I mentioned last week Chassidic saying that the Yetzer Hara, your evil impulse, doesn't want you to sin. That's the biggest mistake, to think that it wants you to get you to sin. So why does it get us to sin if it doesn't really want us to sin? It wants us to feel depressed after sinning. And once you're depressed, he owns you. Because you have no more energy to do anything right anymore. So you're just his messenger to do whatever he wants you to do. See, he controls you. The Yetzer Hara doesn't want you to sin. He wants to control you. He wants to turn you into a professional sinner, an extension of himself. There was a story, it was in a children's magazine that was published about 120 years ago, close, in Russia, that there was a convention of Yetzer Haras. Yetzer Hara is the evil impulse in us. And they had a convention, all of them get together from all parts of the world, and each one, the major ones who were representing large areas, would have to give a report of all their activities. So there's one big Yetzer Hara smoking a big fat Cuban cigar, and he's up there and he's reporting about how he got this person to commit adultery and that person to commit murder and this person to do this terrible sin, and everyone is applauding, a hero. Another one gets up, he said, look, I didn't get him to do sins against people, but he sinned against God. He ate on Yom Kippur, he didn't go to shul, and he did this and this. And they're all applauding it, and there's one little Yetzer Hara sitting in the back who came from the town of Lubavitch, emaciated. He was so miserable, and he was hoping no one will notice him. And then they call out his name, and now the representative from Lubavitch will give his report. And he's turning colors. He's so embarrassed, and he barely has the strength to move up to the podium. And he gets up there and he says, I'm sorry, I'm a failure. I got one of the students to become a little depressed. That's all I can do. We felt guilty that he didn't daven in time, or he didn't have enough kavanah in his davening. And that's as far as I got. I'm a failure, I'm miserable, and he breaks down crying. And then the president gets up, the CEO, and he pats him on the back and he says, you're the most important guy, because that's what we really want. By you getting him to that little sin, the little depression, that's how we conquer. And through him, we get all the power to do all the other big things. At any rate, the test of whether that depression is valid is if it leads to joy afterwards. And that's what he quotes in the Zohar. I think that's what we got up to. If you have the Tanya with the commentary, it's on page 344, the second half of the page. V'yazai, and then Yekuyim bo reisha dekra. The preceding verses will be fulfilled. Make me hear joy and gladness. Tashmiei nisasan v'simcha. Hashiva li sason yeshecha v'ruach nediva. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and support me with your generous spirit. I think that's where we left off at this point. That the Zohar, quoting Psalm number 51, that if you have a broken heart, that broken heart leads to joy. Joy is the goal. The broken heart is the means. Sadness is never an end. Sadness never should be viewed as an objective. It's only a means to an end. Zehu Tam, the bottom of the page now. The Zehu Tam HaPoshut, the Tikkun HaRizal, Lomar Mizmor Zeh Achar Tikkun Chatzos Kodem HaLimud. This is the simple reason for the practice instituted by the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, of reciting this psalm, Psalm 51, after Tikkun Chatzos, the midnight prayer. Let me give a little bit of introduction. Besides the three prayers that we have every day, and besides the prayer that we say before going to bed, there's a prayer called Tikkun Chatzos, the midnight prayer.
My favorite one.
The midnight prayer is hardly said by anyone today, these days. It was, in the olden days, a lot of people said it. What is the midnight prayer? Midnight doesn't mean 12, by the way. Midnight means midnight, in between the 12, let's say midday right now is about 1 something, 1:15. So midnight is 1:15 a.m. That's the midpoint of the night. And there's a special prayer in which you sit on the ground. Some people put ashes on their head, and you lament the destruction of the temple. And it's a very sad experience. And the Arizal, the great Kabbalist, said that after the prayer of Tikkun Chatzos, you should recite Psalm 51. And by the way it used to work where you woke up from midnight. When did you go to bed? I guess after it got dark, because you had to daven Ma'ariv, so you have to first wait till it gets dark. And then midnight you woke up, and you studied Torah after this prayer the whole night. That was the beginning of your day. And then you started the morning prayers. When did people sleep? I guess maybe they took a nap during the day, because in the summer, in Russia, it doesn't get dark until about 10 o'clock. And then you wake up 1 o'clock, you have 3 hours sleep. But that's what people did. I just heard this, I don't know the source of this, but someone said this, that the Rebbe would have people coming to him all night long. And someone noticed that at the point of midnight, when the Rebbe was talking to people about whatever the subject, and the subjects range from Israel's military strategy to someone's personal problems and everything else in between, the Rebbe would steer the conversation towards the Beis HaMikdash, towards the Holy Temple. That was his way of fulfilling his obligation to say that prayer, even when he was talking about other subjects. Why did he say we should recite Psalm 51? Because on one hand, the recitation of Tikkun Chatzos, the midnight prayer, is the saddest prayer that you can possibly say. You're crying for the destruction of the temple, and not just for the temple in Jerusalem, but the Torah says that every Jew has to create a temple in his own heart and soul. It says that you should make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in them. Them meaning in each and every Jew. So you're crying over your own destruction and the destruction of your community's values, and I don't mean physical destruction. Unfortunately, there were times when it was physical destruction. Whatever there is to be sad about, that's what you focus on during that midnight prayer. That's not a healthy thing. So the Rizal says, it's right, it's not healthy if you leave it at that. You recite Psalm 51, which emphasizes that the goal is the joy. If you finish that prayer and you're not exhilarated, then you know that prayer was out of place because it made you sad. We have the same thing in the month of Tishrei. We have Yom Kippur. It's a very solemn day. No one goes around smiling, singing, and dancing, although there is singing in the prayers, but it's a very solemn type of singing. And that's followed by Sukkos, Simchas Torah. Well, let's go to a wedding. In a wedding, the first part of the wedding is very solemn. It's the most solemn time in a person's life. It's the Yom Kippur of your life. You don't have to wait a week and a half to celebrate Simchas Torah. Right after the chuppah, after the most solemn occasion in your life, it's the most joyous occasion in your life. Because Judaism doesn't look at solemnity as true sadness. It's the prelude to joy. This is the famous story of the Chassid, was before Yom Kippur, and he heard that there was a Jewish family that was thrown into a dungeon and would not be released because they were in arrears on their rent for the inn that they rented from the local landowner, and they could languish in that dungeon and die there, which is something that happened. And the guy wanted 300 rubles. That was an exorbitant amount. So this chassid put aside all his preparations for Yom Kippur, and he tried to raise some money, and he was raising pennies. Jews were poor. So he goes into this bar, this tavern, and there were Jews there who were not religious, and they were sitting at a table playing cards. And there's a lot of money on the table. So he goes over to them and he says, please, you have to save this Jewish family. They're languishing in a dungeon. Where's your heart? And they see this chassid, they poke fun at him, and they said, okay, we'll give you 100 rubles. If you could, they poured him a cup of vodka. Said, if you drink this cup of vodka, we'll give you 100 rubles. Look, he wasn't used to, Chassidim liked to drink a little, but he wasn't used to downing a whole glass of vodka, and those vodkas, I think, were stronger than the ones that we had, than Smirnoff. So he downs the whole cup, and they give him 100 rubles. And he says, but I need 300. So another guy says, here's this cup. If you finish this cup, I'll give you another 100. And the same thing happened with the third 100. And he barely had to be carried to the house of the landowner, gave him the 300 rubles, and the family was released. And he just tells them, please, take me to the shul. And they dump him in the shul, and he's sprawled on a bench, drunk, out of his mind, and falls asleep. And people come into the shul, we call Nidre, how disgusted they were. Here's this drunkard laying there in Yom Kippur, but they didn't do anything. He was sleeping there, and they just avoided him. And then the ark is opened, for Kol Nidre, and that's when you take out the Torahs for Kol Nidre. And he wakes up, and he sees the ark open and Torahs, so he assumes it must be Simchas Torah. So he bangs on the table, and he starts announcing the honors for the Torah. And the people were incensed, and they were ready to drag him out. The chutzpah, the spirit of Yom Kippur is being so sullied by this drunken Jew. And the Rebbe, I think I heard the story was about the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, turned around and told them to stop. He says, he's way ahead of us. He's already at Simchas Torah. Some of us have to go through this initial period of solemnity and Yom Kippur. He's way beyond that. He passed that. He doesn't have to have Yom Kippur. He already has Simchas Torah. So, but that's what happened at a wedding. You don't have to wait that long. You're able to go from one to the other. But the goal is the joy. So what is the reason he instituted that? Kidei lilmud b'simcha amitis b'Hashem haba acher ha'atzev. That you should study with the true joy in God that succeeds the remorse of Tikkun Chatzot, of that prayer. Sheyesh l'simcha zu yisron. Such joy is of a greater quality than any other joy. Person who never feels sad, who never has anything to feel sad about, and is always in a good mood, cannot compare to the joy that a person experiences after going through this period of sadness. It's ki yisron ha'or haba min ha'choshen dafka. It's like the distinctive quality of light which follows darkness. Zohar, as it says in the Zohar, as it comments al pasuk on the verse, this is King Solomon. Now, King Solomon is the wisest of all people, and this is what he comes up with. Re'isi, I saw. I mean, he's not just stating something. He said, I came to this realization. I saw. Sheyes Yisron l'chachma min hasichlos ki Yisron ha'or. That wisdom surpasses foolishness as light surpasses darkness. You need King Solomon to come up with this idea that wisdom is better than foolishness, just as light is better than darkness. That cannot possibly be what King Solomon is trying to teach us. So what does the Zohar say? So he says, Ayin Sham, note there, look there, V'day Maven, this will be enough, suffice for him who understands. What the Zohar says is we're mistranslating the verse. In Hebrew, one letter could be translated two ways. The way it's translated is, I saw that wisdom, I'll translate literally, I saw that there was an advantage to wisdom over foolishness. But that's not really what he's saying. I see that there's an advantage to wisdom that comes out of foolishness, or that follows foolishness, just like the advantage of light that comes out of darkness, not the advantage of light over darkness. A child knows that light is better than darkness, but King Solomon says that when light comes after darkness, the light is so much more appreciated. Someone is in the dark, and they don't know where they're going, and they're tripping and falling, and all of a sudden someone turns on a light. The joy that you feel is incredible. If the light was always there, you take it for granted. The same way, when someone comes to realizing wisdom after they had been foolish, that wisdom is much more appreciated than just any other wisdom. Where do we find this in actual life with an actual person? There's a person who's named after this concept. Does anyone know who I'm talking about? He was a father-in-law. Jethro. Yisro was Moshe's father-in-law. Yisro is the same root as the word here for Yisro, advantage or surpasses. Why was he named Yisro? One of the reasons for it is because Yisro came to the realization of the truth of God, of one God and of Judaism, after he had been in the dark and had probed into every other religion. He was a priest of every cult, of every religion that was in existence in his time in Midian. And he rejected every single one of them. He says, no, this one is not true. He poked in the darkness, he groped in the darkness, until he finally came to the realization that there's one God, and that's the God that took the Jews out of Egypt, and he joined the Jewish people. And the Zohar says that God waited to give the Torah until Yisro came. Because the Torah is about the ultimate light. The ultimate light is when it comes out of darkness. And the same thing over here. The ultimate joy is when it comes out of sadness. When a person is broken because of their deficiencies, because of their negatives, and they assign time for it, not when their Yetzer Hara wants them to think about it and make them depressed, but when they decide, I'm going to set aside 15 minutes once a week to reflect on myself and to see where I can change, and after the 15 minutes, whether my Yetzer Hara likes it or not, I'm stopping, I'm not going to continue, then you will feel joy, great joy. And that joy will be incredibly more powerful than the joy that happens to a person who's just happy-go-lucky all the time. That's superficial, shallow joy. This is profound joy. Then he goes on, Mikra Mali Dibur HaKosiv. Furthermore, the verse states explicitly. In other words, all this is based on the Zohar and mystical teachings, but the truth is it's in the Torah itself. Where is it in the Torah? The most difficult chapter to read in the Torah is by far the Tochacha, the curses in Deuteronomy. In fact, when it's read, the person who reads it quietly. It's so painful to read and to hear that you have to read it quietly. No one wants to get called up for that aliyah. So the Baal Kori, the one who reads the Torah, traditionally gets it. In the olden days in Europe, there were a lot of poor Jews, so they used to sell it. They used to give it to a poor Jew and pay him for it. You know, they tell a joke of how the rabbi calls this Jew and he says, I want you to come for the service because we need you for that aliyah. And make sure you're here on time. You start davening 9 o'clock and you better be here because no one else is going to take that aliyah. If we get to that aliyah, no one's going to take it. We'll be stuck here till next week. Well, the Jew doesn't make it. He's not there 9 o'clock, 9:30. They start to read the Torah. The last minute, he comes rushing in. He's out of breath. And he gets the aliyah. So the rabbi says to him, why did you come late? We were so nervous that you wouldn't show up. He says, you think I can make a living from one tochacha? I had to go from shul to shul to get that aliyah. So it's a very painful aliyah. And the curses are just so difficult to even hear. Yet, one of the curses is very strange. It says, why are you getting all these terrible calamities happening? If I translate it the way Rashi translates it, it doesn't sound so bad as the way it's translated by the Ari. The way Rashi translates it is that the reason you get these curses is because you did not serve God when you are in a state of joy and you had everything you wanted. Even when God gave you everything, you did not feel a need to serve God. The Arizal has a different interpretation. He says everyone is familiar with his explanation. The Noda will call Pirush Arizal Pasuk Zeh. The Arizal's interpretation is as follows. The reason why you get all these curses is because you did not serve God with joy. Not because you didn't serve God, not because you're sinners, but because you did serve God, but you didn't do it with joy. That begs, obviously, for an explanation. How could it be that just for not serving God with joy, to make the question even stronger, the commentaries on the Tanya ask, why does the Alter Rebbe quote the Arizal? Maimonides, Rambam says the exact same thing, and he lived a few hundred years before the Arizal. He says the same thing, that the punishment comes because we didn't serve God with joy. And the answer is that the Arizal added another nuance to it. The end of the verse is, you didn't serve God with joy, mirov kol, when you had a multitude of everything. What does that mean? So the Arizal said, it's not enough to have joy, but your simcha, your joy, has to be greater than the joy you have from everything else. In fact, even greater than the joy that you have in Gan Eden, in paradise. That's the joy that a person has to have in serving God. That it's even greater than all other physical and spiritual joy. The ability to serve God should be the most exhilarating thing. And if not, then God forbid, we are vulnerable. So the question is, how could we be punished so severely? So the answer, I think, is that you're not punished for not having the joy. God is not a tyrant. He doesn't punish his people because they weren't singing and dancing. It's that we are vulnerable. It says in the Torah, in the Midrash, in the Talmud, that we are like one lamb surrounded by 70 wolves. What are the odds of that lamb coming out unscathed? Not very good. And you don't have to go to the Medrash, you go to the UN. If you see that it's 190 wolves surrounding one lamb. There's no way, naturally, that we could survive under these conditions. So we are vulnerable. What protects us when we have armor is the Torah that we study, the mitzvahs that we do. But that armor has chinks in it. What makes it whole is the joy. If we don't have the joy, we're vulnerable. Not that the lack of joy will harm us. I can't imagine that God would take it out because we're lacking in joy. But if we had that joy, we wouldn't be able to suffer. We would be protected. We will be invincible. The joy that a Jew has, the confidence that a Jew has, the faith that a Jew has, the optimism that a Jew has, is his greatest strength. This is the famous maxim of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, one who's the white coat over there, is tracht gut wird sein gut. If you think positive, it will be positive. That means that the joy itself creates positive energy and protects you. That's why it's so important to have this joy. Let me share a story. And I heard a similar story, a few of these different situations, but the similar point. Some of you may have seen the video, but it's a story that has been going around for many years. In Toronto, there's a Rabbi Shochet, very prominent rabbinic family. Well, Rabbi Shochet Sr. in Toronto, he's a man in his 80s. He has a sister who was, I think, under 2 years old, and she fell into a pot of boiling water that they used for the laundry. They boiled water, and the mother went to get the doorbell rang, and the baby just fell in, and the doctors didn't feel she would survive. And he wasn't a Chabad Chassid, but his brother-in-law was Rabbi Chadikov, the Rebbe's secretary, so he calls him up, and the Rebbe gets on the line, or the Rebbe tells Rabbi Chadikov to tell him that they should make a Kiddush on Shabbos, a joyous Kiddush on Shabbos. And here, the doctors are saying the kid might not survive the night, or the day, whatever it was, and here the Rebbe is saying, make a Kiddush on Shabbos. And when he expressed, like, how could make a Kiddush? The baby is, he said, look, you asked the Rebbe, that's what the Rebbe said. And of course the miracle was the child survived, and the doctor said she will never have children. She has 16 children. So it's a very famous story. Rabbi Newman is her name. From long.
So what year was this? And was this back in Russia? That they were
No. This was in Toronto in the 1950s. They were this came from Europe, and they were very poor. They didn't even have a telephone. They didn't have a washing machine or anything like that. This was in the 1950s.
I know the Newmans. Wow. So it's the Newman's mother?
Newman from
California?
Long Beach, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the story with her. But there's a video of Rabbi Shochet and telling the story. But why did the Rebbe say to make a Kiddush? The power to be able to overcome all the odds. Medically, the odds were such that there was no way you can survive. The one thing that would overcome all the odds is the joy associated with Kiddush on a Shabbos, a spiritual joy, which first of all demonstrates that you have faith and trust that things will get better, and it's accompanied with joy. And that is what worked. And I heard this similar type of story on other occasions as well, where the Rebbe would say to celebrate before the miracle happened. Anyone could celebrate after the miracle happens. That's easy. But to celebrate before the miracle happens, that's a challenge. And that is what works. Just a few comments. Today we won't get into the next part, but just wanted a few questions over here that I didn't get to. In the verse that King Solomon uses, King Solomon says, I saw, Ra'isi ani, I, he emphasizes the I saw that there's an advantage to wisdom over foolishness. The Alter Rebbe omits that word. So the Rebbe explained, because if it was just King Solomon, you'd say, you know what, only King Solomon could benefit from wisdom out of foolishness or joy out of sadness. The average Joe, forget about it. It won't work. So the Alter Rebbe says, no, this is not just for King Solomon, it's for everyone. It's something you could see. It's clear. That's why he emphasizes I see, but he takes out the word I, to indicate that it's not just King Solomon. Once King Solomon established it, it became relevant for everyone. Rabbi Yossi Jacobson about the Zidichover Rebbe. This goes back probably 150 years or more. He had a 5-year-old son. His name was Berish. And it was Pesach night. And the kid was the one who was supposed to ask the 4 questions. And he's nowhere to be found. So everyone's getting very nervous. You know, in those days, who knows what could have happened to a 5-year-old child. Just at the last moment, he comes running in and he's dripping with water all over him. And his mother asked him, "Where were you?" He said he wanted to go to the mikveh before he asked the 4 questions, to ask it in purity. So his mother got very angry at him and says, "You have chutzpah." And the father says, "No, he's going to be a Rebbe one day." And he did. He became a great Chassidic leader. But anyhow, this is as a child. He was a 5-year-old child when the next story happened. One of his cousins, by the name of Moshe, became seriously ill, gravely ill. And they, of course, came to his uncle to pray for him, the Rebbe. And the condition didn't get any better. In fact, it was deteriorating day by day, until the doctor said, "That's it, there's no hope." And the family was distraught that their uncle, the Rebbe, was not able to, he was a miracle worker, and here his prayers were not being answered. So the little kid, when he heard about how serious the condition was, came running to his father. He knocked on the door. His father wasn't seeing anyone, but he knocked on the door and he comes in and he says, "I have wonderful news to tell you. The best news that I've ever heard, that Moshe's condition is improving dramatically. But please pray for him that he has a full recovery." And he started praying and he recovered. So they asked him, "What happened over here?" He says, "Whenever I saw your faces, whenever you came to me to pray for him, you were crying, you were broken, you were sad, you were depressed." He said, "That closed up all the power that I had within me to pray. But when Moshe, the 5-year-old, not Moshe, Berish, the 5-year-old kid came to me and told me, I have the greatest news, it's such happy news. He opened up all the gates of my neshama, and my prayers were able to be recited." And that's what changed the whole condition. And a similar thing happened when the Rebbe suffered a massive heart attack in 1977. It's Shmini Atzeret, Simchas Torah. And one of the elder Chassidim, Rabbi Shlomo Kazanovsky, came into the Rebbe's room and he saw the condition in which the Rebbe was, and he started crying. And the Rebbe said, "Please stop crying. I can't stand sadness. If the Chassidim want me to recover, they have to be happy." And the message was given to the Chassidim. This was Simchas Torah. And the Chassidim danced, literally, thousands of people were dancing continuously throughout the entire night with great joy to the words, "The Rebbe will be well." Then someone changed the lyrics to "The Rebbe is well." And that probably went on for 6 to 8 hours straight, dancing straight to the thousands of people just dancing. And the Rebbe had a miraculous, total recovery. So after with the doctor, I heard the doctor say the Rebbe suffered a heart attack on a scale of 1 to 10. It was a 10. Dr. Weiss, I heard him say it it was a taped interview. And the Rebbe had a total recovery and resumed his activities and added more things and spent more time, spoke longer at his Farbrengens. Everything, after a year or two, changed in a miraculous way for so many years. And what was it that did it? It was the simcha, the joy of the Chassidim. That has the power to break through all the barriers. In one of the Rebbe's discourses, the Rebbe says that even though sadness is a prelude to joy, sometimes you have to engage in some sadness. He says, nowadays we don't have the strength. I don't know if the Rebbe meant that there's no room for it at all, but he was saying we have to minimize that as much as possible. We are in a weaker, we have a weaker constitution. We can't handle stress the way our forebears were able to. they were much more used to stress and hardship. For us, if you left the smartphone home when you leave your house, you're bent out of shape. What am I going to do? I don't have my phone. We can't survive with so much more luxury and ease and everything. If the washing machine breaks down, we can go crazy. Our grandmothers didn't have washing machines. Our great-grandmothers didn't have it. They had so much more hardship, so much more challenges, and they were able to weather them. We are weaker. We can't. We're spoiled in many ways, and we want more comfort and everything. So if we're going to try to focus on having this broken heart, we're not going to be strong enough to withstand that. But on the other hand, we are now on the threshold of the time of total simcha, when there will be no more hardship and no more sadness. We have to prepare for that. We have to learn how to cope with happiness. You know, in Crown Heights, we have it easy here. We should have it as hard as they do. My bracha is in this regard. Crown Heights, you have to go to a simcha every single day, maybe 2 or 3 a day, because you know everyone, and every night is either going to be 1, 2, or 3 weddings, 1, 2, or 3 bar mitzvahs, engagement parties, a bris. Every day there's probably a bris, and Pidyon Ben, not that often, but the first haircut of a boy, upsharnish. In other words, if you, let's say, don't have a penny to your name, you're homeless, you will still be overweight.
You have real people like that.
Yeah, because they go to every simcha and every wedding. There's a table for beggars.
Right.
There's a special table for anyone who wants to come in at every wedding, and they eat gourmet food every single night. And during the day, there's a bris, so they eat a gourmet breakfast, the lox and the bagels and the cream cheese and everything else. So they can eat 3 meals a day and sometimes eat at 2 weddings. So they like the menu at another wedding. But what I'm saying is, very seriously, is that it's not easy to celebrate that much. That should be our biggest problem. But that's what we're gearing ourselves for, to learn how to cope with total, constant joy. And to get ready for that, we have to have more joy and less of the sadness. And next week, we'll get into his advice how to deal with physical problems, with illness and other types of problems. It's going to be very challenging to apply that to ourselves. But we have to learn what it is. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of questions. So, when you're talking about, let's say, being in this dark room and you all of a sudden someone turns a light on, I mean, I wouldn't view that so much as joy, but more like relief. Like, now we can see.
We're comparing it. No, we're saying just like there's an advantage to light, you appreciate the light much more after darkness, out of darkness. Same way we appreciate the wisdom is deeper after darkness than it is without the darkness. The same way, joy is so much greater when it comes after sadness than if it just comes because you never had a worry in your life and nothing ever bad happened. So
are you saying that people should want to have challenges in their life? I mean, because I have heard people, like, not in the observant circles, like sometimes I've been to some of these baby naming services and stuff, and they'll actually have part of their prayer is like, give their child enough challenges to make them strong. And I'm always like, wow, it's just such an awful thing to say.
We say a prayer to God, don't give me any challenges.
Right. So, but on the other hand, you're saying it's such a benefit to have that in order to really achieve your goal. Now, obviously, it's hard to imagine someone that has a life with no challenges. I mean,
there is no such thing.
Part of the circle of life.
That's the point. That's why we ask God, don't give us any more challenges than that life itself presents as a matter of course. Until Mashiach comes, life itself is always there with challenges. There's no way you can avoid them. So we don't ask for more. King David asked for a challenge. He wanted to be really challenged, and he blew it. So we're not supposed to ask for challenges because we have enough of them.
I mean, like, let's say, I'm not really speaking about myself, but I've heard people that are other Bali Chuba speak and say how they, because I want to compare this to like a real life situation. Let's say where you someone that was not from and then they became from. So people, I've heard people say, that how much they regret their life, even though like this is not truly like the way we review it, right? But they regret things they did in the past. They feel sad that they weren't, raised with certain types of parents and knew how to pray as a child, or now they don't know how to give that over to their own kids, or, and they don't it doesn't seem like it makes them appreciate it more. If anything, it's like they feel like they
Well, who says that
out.
their feeling is justified?
No, maybe it's not. I'm just,
No,
I don't know, I'm just
think
giving
it's
this,
certainly
I've
not
heard
justified
people say that. I don't
because
know.
it's even if their life before was put them at a disadvantage, it's not the life that they chose. The God put them there, so that means that was the way God wanted it.
But I'm saying it didn't make them feel like it didn't seem like they appreciated it more.
Because they have hardship, and people don't like hardship. That's true. That's why they need to read Tanya to recognize that the hardships that they have only is there to make their joy even greater, their spirituality even greater.
There was an article in the paper about how tough the winter was and how it makes you more resilient having gone through the winter.
Right.
If you had been in a climate 12 months a year like Florida. Like we did go down to Florida, but it made me appreciate it because the only reason we were there was because of the winter.
Well,
if you don't, and if you're not hungry, you can't appreciate having a meal.
but the proper attitude in all this is that you savor the challenges you had and you pray for no more. The previous Rebbe, when he went through the torture of imprisonment and other forms of torture, he said afterwards, for all the money in the world, I would not give up 1 second of the pain that I suffered. But for all the money in the world, I wouldn't ask for another second of it. Both are true. That's the paradox here. We value the pain we had in the past, and we'll see reasons why that pain is positive, but only because it's in the past. You never ask God for more pain. Certainly not for others, but not even for yourself. But we'll get more into that next week.